Good evening. Evening. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry that I'm Jim Carrick-Burwell. We were one microphone short. And this is apparently a microphone. And we're going to be using it this evening. It's going to bounce around or be passed around. Quite how that works with glasses of wine, I don't know. But welcome, everybody, to our Future Talent Leaders Club. I should say, alongside this, thank you to Business 3.0, which Atif Sheikh is chief exec. They've been partnering with us, and they've helped, apart from anything else, come up with this ball, and also shape the format of the room, which was it started off. There were all sorts of discussions which I kept out of, and then all sorts of swatches kept appearing in our office. Looked like El Deco in terms of, and I was going, I'm staying completely out of this. But I hope you all agree it looks really quite marvellous in here. So thank you very much to the team. This evening, it's great to see so many people that I know and recognise from other Future Talent events that we've hosted, whether they're conferences or smaller events. For those of you that know us, you'll know some of the themes and what they're all about. For those of you that don't, essentially what we look to explore under the Future Talent agenda are some of the really big changes going on in the world of work. So whether they are globalization, mental health, well-being, the impact of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and actually there's quite a long list of these really major changes and disruptions going on in our world and in the world of work. And I've kind of long said that if you look at talent through those lenses, that's really very high up on many chief execs' agenda. And with the sort of senior HR community that we work with, we're kind of interested in making those subjects accessible, not being sort of futurologists too far ahead of our time, but touching on themes that are affecting our everyday work. And that led us to the kind of the theme for this evening, mobilising behind continuous change. And working with Atif and the team, it's something they're passionate about. They do a lot of work in this area. And it's a particular kind of privilege to be working with three people that I've known for quite some time. So I'll let Atif introduce the guys in a second. But Atif was involved in our first Future Talent conference, interviewing Christine Deputy from Aviva. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
The first one at the Royal Opera House about 6 years ago. Ashok kindly agreed to speak on stewardship. And I got to know Ashok Vaswani, who's the UK Chief Executive of Barclays, primarily through Life Skills, which is an enormously sort of successful program within Barclays and the wider world, engaging young people and building a whole range of kind of skills for them. And actually, I mentioned this to one of the chief colleagues. After he appeared at the conference, he, to my great delight, invited myself and my wife to the women's final at Wimbledon, which still, I think my wife thought, gosh, my husband is doing something useful for a change. So thank you for that. And Chris, who we've been in the Middle East. He's been involved with events that Change Board have been producing in the Middle East. And as the group chief executive of City and Guilds, actually they're enormous supporters, which I'm very grateful for quite a lot of the Future Talent events that we're involved with, including being the major partner at our conference last year and this year. So I hope this is going to be a really interesting evening. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Atif, who's going to run us through the proceedings.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you very much.
All right, welcome everybody. So as Jim said, we're kind of sat in this horseshoe shape, and the bad news for you is that's because we don't want this to be a conversation between the three of us. We'd like it to be a conversation between the 60 or 70 of us. So we will get going, but you are expected to participate. This is not just an excuse to quaff wine. Somebody was talking about throwing things at us earlier. Somebody was talking about touching us, which is a bit weird. But anyway, it's not an excuse for that. So hopefully we'll all get into this subject. There's plenty to explore within it. Jim, are you going to control the ball mic? Are you I'm in charge of throwing. I see throwing. Okay, great. So look, from as early as you want, just stick your hand up if you want to. Don't worry about interrupting. If you've got something you need to say or a question you need to ask, stick your hand up and that ball will wang its way towards you. And make sure you're not holding a glass of wine when it does. So just really briefly, I mean, I think the subject of mobilising your people and all your people, very deliberately phrased that way for continuous change is pretty critical. I doubt there's many of us sat here tonight going, this subject feels irrelevant in an era where there are multiple disruptions hitting businesses. And I guess our, Business 3.0, where what we do is help big businesses reinvent fast. I think we started off the business going, great, we should help big businesses reinvent fast. We know a bit about that, but not all the answers. And then realized very quickly that the challenge was much deeper than that, which was this question, which is how do you get businesses set up for continuous change, not just for like a change. A change is hard enough of the order that we need to do, but continuous change, wow. So I think all of us are sat here with some lessons, but I think given the nature of this subject, none of us have all the answers. And in fact, I suspect we probably have, at best, half the answers. Which brings me to my first question for you two, which is, let's start in the spirit of humility with our biggest cock-ups. So in terms of this subject of trying to rig your organisation for change, let's not. I'm very happy to share my own story after you've shared yours, but it's not just about put it all on yours. But
that wasn't how you teed it up.
I just didn't want it to look like I was going to go. You guys talk cock-ups, and I'll talk about what I've nailed, and then so I will participate if you so desire. But Chris, maybe start with you. Give us your story, your biggest cock-up in terms of trying to get change happening and get your people mobilised around it.
Right, biggest cock-up. I'd relate it back to, I suppose, I was thinking about this this morning, a little bit about sort of a George Bush moment of declaring victory too early. And it happened to do with a significant integration of an acquisition that my business that I was working for at the time made in the US. That acquisition had delivered a huge variety of strategic benefits, but it had required significant sort of cultural change. It had required significant technological integrations. It had seen us retire products, replace with new products. And we got to the point where that plan looked as if it had landed perfectly, at which point the market changed. Our nearest and largest competitor innovated significantly on their business model. And within around about 7 months, we were faced almost with having to re-engineer a business that was 3 times larger than the business that we'd already started with at the outset. And it was that moment of, shit, fuck. Actually, this is all going horribly wrong. And it really was a sense that we just declared victory far too early. And it hadn't, as almost as if that was it, we could draw the line under it, job done, with almost disregard to what was happening on a continuous basis in the outside world. So alongside declaring too early, we'd become very inward focused and we'd forgotten what was really happening in the market.
Thanks very much. Ashok?
Hey, Atif, how long do you have, man?
I've got about 45 minutes.
I'm really kind of thinking about which ones I should pick up. But I think it's important I'll give you at least 2, right? Because I think they kind of define the other side on both sides of the continuum. I think the first one, and you've been with us on the journey, so I think you'll kind of recognize this. So about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we kind of realized that, look, the technology is going to change our entire business model quite significantly, and we've got to get on with it and get kind of going. And very naively, I thought that if we could just get the technology aspects of it done, everything else will fall into place. So, we built this beautiful mobile banking app, and, we thought it was like the coolest thing since sliced bread, and we went out with it. And oh my God, what a disappointment. It just didn't take off. And what kind of struck us then was how we had missed the complete people element of it. So in any of these changes, and that's very relevant to today's topic actually, how you take your team through it and how the team kind of actually promotes it, right? And honestly, this is something we should have learned before. How many times have you heard of retailers who built a online business and they have a store business, and the online business and the store business go head to head. And you know, the amount of effort that they have to do to make sure that it kind of works together. Honestly, we made, within our context, we made the same mistake. I've now come to believe, and I say this very openly, is that in a digital business, it's all about the people, right? And it seems like a kind of misnomer, but actually in a digital business, it's all about the people. And it's not about the technology people, it's about the people in the organization and how they kind of take it forward. On the other end of the continuum, I was like so convinced that disruption is happening. And I thought we had got ahead with the retail business. So I thought, made sense to go ahead with the wealth business as well. And I put a lot of effort into the wealth business, and I changed the leadership of the wealth business. I said, I'm not going to get a traditional wealth manager. I'm going to get somebody who knows how to drive innovative change. And oh my God, again, what a big mistake, right? We lost about 2 years, right? 2 years, frustration all around, because the wealth business had not really kind of transformed. And at the core of it, again, the learning is not different. The learning is fundamentally, if I can pick up the phone and I can get something done, or if I meet somebody and I just say what I want done, there is nothing more convenient than that, right? It's so much more convenient to say, hey, Atif, just do this for me, versus take out my phone, log in, password, tap, 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 and then I'll check whether it's happened, blah, 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 blah. And therefore, getting, the people dimension right and getting the timing of these things right, I think is absolutely critical.
So, two great lessons already. I think that thing about declaring victory is fascinating, because you could argue in the modern world you basically can't. One of the things that's changed is there is no moment where you can declare victory. Oh shit, we're just in an endless kind of forward motion and through things that are difficult and ambiguous. And then I think this lesson about, fundamentally, actually the more you think about tech, the more you should really be thinking about people, and is a great one. Has anybody else in the audience got a cock-up that they kind of fancy sharing? I'm going to get you involved early, otherwise you are just going to sit there and watch us for an hour, which we can't possibly have. Go on, somebody. Don't worry about your catching ability. We're not rating anyone on that.
Okay, I'll go.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, this is a bit of an embarrassing one, and it's close to my heart because I was presenting about it today to the management committee that we made the cock-up to. So some of this does.
Could you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry.
Was it deliberate?
Absolutely,
Maybe.
sorry. No.
I'm not going to tell you my name.
I probably should.
You can hear my cock-up and know who I
anonymous.
am. Yeah.
So I'm Gloria Knight, and
Thanks,
I look after the talent acquisition function for Marsh McLennan Companies. And we acquired a company a couple of years ago called Jelf. And they are a complex business. They've got 90 offices throughout the country, thousands of people, and they've kind of operated as a sort of a small SME, really, in the market. And we took them over, and we're a big company, and we overpromised. And we didn't say, ta-da, here we are, this is all going to be amazing, but we overpromised and in a time frame that was not realistic. And also, we didn't go into the detail. We didn't get the forecast correctly, accurately detailed, I guess. And what we didn't do is we didn't hire the right people. So we were 197% out. And the reason I say that number is because that's the number I was presenting to the board today, to say, this is huge. If you don't get the forecast, you don't understand actually what the business needs are, how can you support them? And I think the digital market is all about people. But I think my business, which isn't particularly digital focused, it is for Mercer, it's always about people, right? And if you get it wrong and you don't do the research and you don't do the background, you are screwed. And it's embarrassing. And then I've spent the last 6 months trying to pick it up and restructuring the team around that, because we didn't do the analysis that we should have done and didn't spend that time thinking about the people.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go on.
Surely.
Anyone else? No? Okay, it means I'm going to have to whack my one, and then we can move on. So mine's actually, No, just say, don't want to leave Gloria hanging with her story last. So I mean, mine's just a very simple. Actually, it was when I was. It was the first time I was asked to merge teams and try and transform them into another business, and I think the opportunity was so clear that I committed that. It's a really basic leader mistake. I have a horrible feeling it's one that men are more likely to make than women, if I'm honest. But which is kind of going, the vision's really clear. I think I've got that. I think we know what this looks like. Everybody's feeling really uncertain. My job is to bring them clarity and confidence. Let me bring them clarity and confidence by laying out the story of like, this is what we need to go do, and there's the opportunity, and this is the difference we'll make, etc., etc. And I just remember being really first powerful lesson, because sometimes in a larger business this goes hidden, but it didn't in the business I was in at the time. Just a massive kind of quite virulent organ rejection of that. Actually, not really of the thinking, more just of being told the answer and kind of going, well, don't really want to be told the answer. We'd quite like to work out the answer or be engaged in the answer. We'd quite like to understand it for ourselves. And I think it's a really, it was a kind of lesson in a very small team, but it's really germane for big businesses. So I think often in big businesses that you don't get that virulent kind of mass rebellion. You just get indifference, basically. They just don't say anything. But by saying not anything, what they're really doing is going, you can basically F off with that set of answers because I don't know whether I believe it, and you haven't really engaged me or talked to me about it, and there's some quite scary stuff that I'm going to have to do and change, and you haven't really engaged me in it. So I just thought it was really visceral lesson for me, kind of slinking around at drinks that night going, I don't really think anybody wants me to be here. I think they hate me. But actually just magnified, kind of going, well, actually, at least in the small business, you have the gift of knowing what people really think. In a big business, sometimes it just is silence, and people going back to them doing things the way they always have done, which I think is almost even more damaging when you're trying to mobilise people. Okay, let's move on. So I guess one of the things that I think is really interesting is in the old world of business, what you could do actually, just kind of coming off the back of the story I've just shared, is give people clarity where actually you kind of didn't need to. It was sort of clear. We're in this business, this is how we do things, the operating model works roughly this way, like now we're either doing a bit more of it or a bit less of it, or saving some cost or adding a new product line or whatever. I guess in the modern world, the business model's less clear, or at least people are nibbling away enough of your value chain that people are going, well, what business are we in? And can we still be in this business in 10 years' time or 5 years' time? You need to change to stay relevant and competitive. You know that's going on out there in the world. And you also can't be sure about the end destination, because who knows? And the world's changing ever faster, and I don't know what the world's going to look like, let alone what our answer should be. So I guess in that environment, Ashok and Chris, be good to hear about your views on how you create clarity, because in the end, people do need clarity. Even if you help them find their own way there, they need clarity to be able to go execute and focus and all those good things. So what have you learned about how you create clarity in that context, in that kind of ever-shifting sense? Ashok, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So Atif, I think you're absolutely right? One of the things I believe in is if you're not eating out of somebody else's lunchbox, be very careful. You're going to go hungry because surely somebody's eating out of your lunchbox, right? So how are you going to continuously eat out of somebody else's lunchbox is a very important kind of lesson. And you've got to continuously do that, right?
I don't go to lunch with Ashok.
But I think you're also absolutely right as to say how are you going to kind of focus the organization. And what I have sincerely come to believe is that every single organization, and honestly, small, large, whichever industry you're in, every single organization must define what societal purpose it's solving. Because if you treat that as the true north, right, I think a lot of other things will fall into place. Now, a lot of people tell me, does that really mean that you're going into CSR? I hate this word CSR, because this is not about CSR. This is about the business model, right? You cannot be doing something from Monday morning to Friday afternoon, then going and painting a bunch of fences or planting trees and saying, I'm kind of done. No, it has to be integrated into your business model. And if it's integrated into your business model and you're getting it right by society, then society will say, right, we recognize, we value this kind of company. The other thing is that people say, oh, okay, agreed, it's not CSR. So what you're really talking about is dealing with the bottom pyramid. No, it's not that. It's about whatever you choose to do. So I take the classic example of Apple, right? A $1 trillion company, well, a little shy of $1 trillion in the last couple of days, but nearly $1 trillion company. And look at what Apple did. Apple's societal purpose was really about making the use of technology intuitive, right? Any Apple product does not come with a manual, right? In fact, I don't know how they do it, but you open an Apple product, it comes charged, right? For the life of me, I can't figure it out. You open the product, it comes charged. So you start using it from day one, and it's intuitive, right? It's completely changed the way we live over the last 10 years, right? I mean, how many of you even remember trying to survive without an app, right? I mean, it's like, now you can't even think about that, but that's only 10 years ago, right? So what they did was they made technology truly intuitive, made technology really, really simple. Guess what? They've been rewarded big time. Look at the valuation of Apple. Nobody can say an Apple product is cheap. I mean, their new phones are going off the rockets. I mean, it's like £1,000, £1,500, you know, God knows what kind of prices. £1,000 for a phone, it's like, I mean, that's expensive by any kind of standards, right? And therefore, defining the purpose of the company, I think then sets the tone for the rest of the thing. And I think that is, to my mind, the most important thing.
Thanks, Ashok. Chris?
Well, look, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I run a organisation that is fundamentally purpose-led. You know, we are a charity, we are a not-for-profit. That is not to say that we do not have to compete brutally hard in our markets, because we don't get funding from anyone. We simply have to create that through our surplus, and that's what we reinvest. But we are capturing our purpose at a point when we're going through an enormous amount of change as a consequence of regulatory change, government policy, funding, competitive pressures. And that's very simple. Everything we do in our organisation helps someone into a job, helps them on the job, helps them on to the next job. They are the only three things that I ever talk about to the organisation as the chief executive. And whether you work for us in America or New Zealand, in a business that we've had for 140 years or a business we've acquired in the last year, that is what every single person aims to do. And wrapped around that is the context of impact. So we're now partnering with people like Cranfield that's measuring the theory of change. So we can look at, for every pound we invest, what is the absolute return we generate for society as a whole. And what I find interesting for us at the moment is, literally, we've just completed a voluntary redundancy exercise. We've got further restructuring to drive. We've got to collapse our 2 London offices into 1. What do we talk about? We talk about the purpose. We keep bringing people back to that single ideal of what we as an organisation are doing. And no matter how hard some of that change often feels for people, it's still helping us understand this job is changing, but what we need you to do now is this job. And that is going to help these people access employment, get progression. And it does, to Ashok's point, give you a clarity around what you do that I think if you can't do that, you are going to struggle at a time when you can't give any sense of certainty. I don't know what my business will look like in 3 years' time. I have a rough idea. But what I do know, and I can say to my staff, is we're still going to be delivering on our purpose. It will look different, feel different, and we'll do it in a different way. But the purpose doesn't change. Because actually, helping people get skills, helping grow competency, helping people understand how they've got to reskill to adjust to the change that's happening in their workplace. Well, I don't see the demand going away for that, but how we do it will be very different. So I think absolutely the clarity of purpose and impact is so, so important in this agenda.
So I always think evenings like this are not really any fun unless we get into a bit of a ruck. So my question is, that's all very well. I happen to agree. Does anybody in the audience have a different view? Let's just stick to the subject of purpose for a second, because the truth is, out there's a lot of people who are really cynical about this subject in the world of business. It sort of feels like it's become the snake oil, the latest thing, the latest management fad. So is anybody? We're not going to come to blows or anything, but does anybody out in the audience got a different view and kind of go, well, I don't know whether that thing, that purpose really works. I don't know whether that really achieves what we're talking about. Oh, we've got a couple. Look at that. Battle is joined.
Hi, Karen Rivoire, former Unilever, former WPP, gigging at the moment with some great female founders. I agree that there's a lot of pushback on purpose. I personally think it's exactly what we need, but I think we've done ourselves a disservice and we're now in the world of purpose washing. So the reason less and less people are believing in it, and Atif is totally right, there's metrics around this as well, is because the companies who have stood up, particularly in the tech world, saying they're building community are in fact driving eyeball optimization and ad dollars without giving any names away. So that purpose washing and that gap we're creating between what we say we do and what we're actually doing is actually working against all the other great stuff that you just described can do. So how do companies... Do you want a question, or was that just answering?
I don't mind, just go for it.
I can translate that into a question. So, how do you make sure that those great purposes you have described live every day in your organisation? I think, in particularly, Ashok, perhaps for you, how do you make sure that that's alive?
Yeah. So, look, ultimately, it's a matter of sincere belief, and it's a matter of making that come to life on every single day. Right? It's a matter of getting the narrative right. And it's a matter of saying that if this is the purpose, then how does it translate through the entire business strategy? Right? It's just not enough to say purpose. It's not enough to put up just, charts, which is what typically, everybody puts up charts everywhere. The screensavers go with the purpose. That's like, and that's like standard, right? Your access cards have stuff with purpose and stuff like that. Honestly, that's interesting. If somebody wants to do it. It's really how do you make that come to life on a day-to-day basis. And I think if you get that whole narrative, it basically says, okay, this is our purpose, right? And time permitting, I can kind of go through ours. But if this is our purpose, this is what our strategy therefore looks like, right? So that comes down to 50,000 feet. What are the elements of the strategy that we're going to work on? What is our, under these circumstances, what we really value as behaviors, right? And what does winning look like? I think really defining what winning looks like in the context of the purpose becomes very important. And then evaluating against those criteria. So everything needs to stand aligned, right? You can't say this is my purpose, but then reward people for doing something other than that. So that courage of conviction and that utter commitment, right? Absolute commitment that this is the way we're going to go about it. I think the minute you falter on that, or the minute it becomes yet one more phrase, right, on one more wall, right, you're gone, right? So, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, I think it's right, isn't it? The test is how authentic is the leadership around purpose, and particularly in environments. So I've spent the majority of my life in very red-blooded, earnings per share driven environments. And at what point does the purpose override that ultimate goal that perhaps might be driven by earnings per share or shareholder return? And if leaders can hold up and say, we will take this action over that because that is true to purpose, and we believe in the long term, we will still get the benefits back. That's where I think the rubber hits the road. Because without it, I don't think you're going to sort of get that authentic leadership or the belief in an organization that you are genuinely purpose-led. Because otherwise it is just simply screensaver words for the sake of screensaver words. Yeah.
So I try to convince the organization, look, ultimately, what do we say? Why are you trying to solve a societal problem? What is society? Society, at least I tell my team, is a very simple thing. It's just customers plus prospects, right? It's everybody who's a customer today plus everybody else who we want as a customer. So therefore, if you're solving a societal problem, it's actually a business model thing, right? So why shouldn't this all hang together? And if we can make this hang together, and second, the way Chris is talking about it, I think that's how you make it really come alive. But it requires a lot of conviction and requires you to be brave around that.
Just going to hand over to Purpose Cynic number 2. Until we know your name, that's how I'm thinking of you.
So my name's Jeremy Tipper, and I work with Alexander Mann Solutions. So we run recruitment for large companies, including Barclays. I love the authenticity versus superficial or purpose washing perspective, because I think it's entirely true. guess the point of view I have is that, you know, more and more purpose is down to the individual. So as we move into a state of work where more and more people are choosing to work flexibly or in the gig economy, and I think as well millennials are pretty cynical about purpose. I guess my question to you guys is, how do we continue to make purpose authentic, given the fact that people that are working for us might not be there on a full-time basis, maybe choosing to work on a flexible basis, where the purpose is really more about, you know, how do I sustain myself and what's important to me rather than necessarily what's important to the company. And I think that's really, really hard, particularly for more and more businesses who are choosing to, you know, deploy more people on a flexible basis than have them as employees.
I mean, it's particularly interesting, I think, in a world where you could argue over the next 10 years the world's trajectory might, for many people, be back down Maslow's hierarchy as survival becomes more important and money becomes scarcer. And, you know, in that world, you can imagine particularly that purpose might start looking like a bit of a luxury to people who are just going, well, I'd quite like a house. I'd quite like to be able to afford a house, you know.
You know, honestly, I'm not sure I entirely agree, and I'll tell you why. My sense is, let's say at Barclays, when we hire graduates and we hire, you know, a lot of millennials, the one thing that really appeals to them is when you really talk about purpose, right? So I tell them, I said, look, I've been in this job for a while. You ask me, how much were my earnings 3 years ago? Honestly, I can't remember. I honestly can't remember, right? Who the hell remember? I know ballpark how much it was, but can I give you the exact number what it was? Frankly, does that get anybody out of bed, right? I mean, it doesn't get anybody out of bed, because I think what you're saying is, how do you achieve? I think purpose is important. What you're saying is, how do you get alignment between personal objectives and corporate objectives? I think that's a different kind of issue, and the different kind of issue is that how you make your people feel good about delivering upon the purpose, right? If people feel good about delivering upon the purpose, if they can go home and talk to their partners, their kids, their families and stuff like that, see what I did today, right? And see what I did today is not about, oh, you know, by the way, today I traded and I made 12,642 pounds. Or yesterday I made 10,372. Who honestly cares? But if you can actually come and say, I did this, and this took the, this helped somebody in their life, I took somebody, you know, I did this, I did that. That gives that sense of fulfillment. And that sense of fulfillment, honestly, to my mind, is far, far more important than what exactly, how much money I made and stuff like that, right? So I think the bringing together, I think my view, I think purpose appeals, bringing together and aligning the personal objectives and the organizational objectives under that purpose banner is what we have to really work at.
I'd agree. I mean, if anything, I'd probably say for the younger staff joining our group, our purpose means far more to them than those that might have been with us for 20 years or so, and engage much more fully in the construct of purpose. We as an organisation, in terms of our business model, see us that actually, you know, we've probably got, if I take total physical headcount resource that we deploy, we are probably around about 45% FTE, 55% sort of associate or some other contracted resource who actually are representing us in the front line. And one of the things we're beginning to work quite hard on is, so what's their experience as an employee relative to that of a full-time employee? And if I'm really honest, it's nothing like that of a full-time employee. So we're really thinking quite hard about how do we re-engineer their experience so that they too can connect to the purpose, but more fundamentally, actually feel part of the organisation. And I think the gig economy, we've all got choices, haven't we? You know, are we going to bring you in, get you to do a job and kick you out again? Or do we want to engage you in the business that we're in, what we're trying to deliver to the market, and your role in that experience of the customer and your employee experience? So those moments of truth, as we talk about customer experience, how do they balance with the moments that matter to us as people. And that, I think, is a really interesting space. And it's going to become even more important as I think the workforce does change. Because, yeah, we've all got to make sure we deliver a value proposition to an employee, whether it's, gig or not, that hopefully allows them to live and sustain themselves, But we've got to find something else beyond that too, I think. We really do.
Anybody else dying to weigh in on the subject of purpose?
Cheers. Hi. Thank you very much. My name is Chaddy Moose. I'm Executive Director of HR for an ethical food business called Wilmore. We have, for I think over 43 years, done some absolutely incredible work for the environment, communities. I think we've impacted nearly 400,000 people. It's in the DNA. So just a couple of things. I take your point about purpose and profit. The bit that I guess I'm a bit confused about or sceptical about is the fact that all of our objectives are around commercial objectives, essentially. And it is purpose beyond profit, but profit first. And I think maybe just being honest about that, from the start. I mean, it's slightly different for a charity or non-for-profit. I accept that, but that is one of the ways, I guess, that people think we're slightly more authentic. We're not a charity. We want to make money, but yes, we want to do other things as well. And then the question for you, Ashok, is how do you reward your exec team for delivering on your purpose, not your financial results? I'm fascinated to understand how you're doing that, so I can steal those ideas.
So look, I never said that the delivery of the purpose should not lead to good financial results. I never said that.
Yeah.
In fact, what I'm trying to say is that if you truly deliver on the purpose, you should get outstanding financial results, right? If you're really solving a need out there for your customers or for your prospects, or what I'm saying, customers plus prospects put together as society, you should get outstanding financial results, right? I'm saying that Apple, I mean, look at the amount of money Apple makes every single year. It's incredible the amount of money they make every single year, right? So if you get it right with the purpose, in fact, you should deliver very good financial. And I see honestly, there is no rub. It's not purpose over profit or profit over purpose. If you truly deliver purpose, you will deliver a great amount of profits. Point number one. Point number two, I think, look, I'm not telling you that I've got it all right and I can sit here and articulate or give you the roadmap and stuff like that. I'm on this learning journey myself. But what I've come to believe, and this is my current belief, is that ultimately, at least on the senior executives, you got to bind them onto common objectives, right? So if you say, this is my narrative, and you define what winning is, then if winning is X, Y, Z, you have a very transparent process of saying every quarter, are we winning or are we not winning, right? And of course, it's on a continuum. It's not a binary kind of thing. But within a band, if you're winning, that's a good thing. And if you're not winning, not a good thing, and you don't get rewarded for it. And it's about as simple as that, right? So in fact, as we speak this November, just today, we finalized what our objectives and what winning looks like for 19, 20, and 21, right? And we said, okay, here it is. All of us have signed up to this. The more senior you get into the organization, the more of your compensation is completely tied to the achievement of the company's goals and not your individual goals, right? You can be the best star player, right? You can be the best star player. Honestly, who cares, right? The analogy that I use is of a rowboat, right? So when you're rowing, you can be the strongest person. You could be rowing really, really hard and stuff like that. But the boat that wins is the boat where all the oars hit the water at the same time and exit the water at the same time. In fact, they keep somebody in the front of the boat, which is extra weight, right? Which is extra weight, just to make sure that the oars hit the water at the same time and exit the water at the same time, right? And therefore, There's no doubt in my mind about purpose and profit. I don't think it's a versus situation. I think the purpose leads to the profit, and two, I think the only way to do it is to have shared objectives.
I think what I've heard, and then let's move off purpose, and would definitely be our experience as well, because it's the space we work in a lot with many of the FTSE 100 is, what we're really talking about is integrity, right? I mean, in the literal sense of the word, in the architectural sense of the word, integrity between this purpose, this strategy, this definition of behaviours, how our leaders operate, what our employee value proposition is, that they all have to have integrity. It needs to be a building that stands straight, not a building where each floor is slightly lopsided from the rest of it. And I think the key, I think I've heard, and I would absolutely agree with it, is that purpose has to create an innovation imperative for the business. That's the key test. If it doesn't do that, you can't link purpose and profit. It becomes almost impossible. They fight each other. But if it creates a genuine innovation imperative, i.e. there's a real need out there, as Ashok has said, a lot of people have that need, and there's a lot of things to do, most of which you don't even know how to do yet. You don't even know what things you have to do. You just know there's going to be a lot of things to do that will be of value to those people. Well, then there's your profit. There's the stuff that you need to get done in order to fulfill that need. But you'll make money along the way because it's valuable enough that people will pay you for it, right? And if you can't do that, and actually I think when we talk about purpose washing, there's a lot of businesses out there with purposes which actually don't do that. When you really look at their purpose, doesn't create an innovation imperative, at that point you're kind of buggered actually. There's not very much you can do to integrate, to create a building with integrity if your purpose doesn't create an innovation imperative. You're kind of done. That's stage one. Okay, we've talked about purpose a lot. Just one final question on clarity actually, because this sort of ended up going, well, the answer to clarity is purpose. So I just want to check. That's one of the answers. What else do we need in this world of shifting sands? What else do we need? And by the way, this is to all of you, not just to these two learned, eloquent gentlemen next to me. What else do you need other than purpose to create that clarity or to help people feel more confident about entering I sometimes think about it as a fog. You set off from one bank, there's a load of fog. Okay, everybody, just trust us, it'll be fine. Off we go. So what else do we need beyond purpose? What else helps in that context? By the way, you two, feel free to pile in if you have got answers. I didn't mean to shut you up, but yeah, I'm just interested. Darren, I'm guessing that's not you volunteering.
No,
so.
no, it's not.
Okay, there we go.
Helping you out here.
Thanks, Darren.
Inclusion for me. So it starts with having a good enough mix around the table to even start co-creating whatever you're going to be co-creating and whatever you're going to be doing to continuously change. But if you haven't got that mix around the table at the beginning, and then that will evolve over time, but it has to start with difference. And that's, I think, the beauty of today. It can be full-time employees, it can be gig, it can be freelance, it can be a whole load of different consultants. But getting that mix around the table at the beginning to co-create your purpose-led strategy is essential.
Anything else from either? Oh, there we go. Sorry, gentleman just behind you, Karen.
Hi everyone, Andy Houston from John Lewis, and this is a really interesting conversation which really resonates with me. I've been within John Lewis for many years, and actually it's very, very clearly underpinned by what's called Principle 1, which is its purpose. And I think at a time when our backs are to the wall, actually, I think it's resonating even more in terms of the importance of engagement in the purpose. We've introduced a new scheme this year called Earning Membership. So anyone who joins our organisation has a 90-day trial period where they have to demonstrate that they hold the right values, and through feedback from their co-workers, have an endorsement to then pass their trial probation period. So I think there's a really key message there about we're looking for people who embrace our purpose. And I thought what would be interesting, I was just going to indulge and share it with you, because this purpose was written in the 1920s, and it's exactly the same today as it was then. And it states the partnership's ultimate purpose is in the happiness of all of its members through their worthwhile and satisfying employment in a successful business. Because the partnership is owned in trust for its members, they share the responsibilities of ownership as well as its rewards, profit, knowledge, and power. And I think for me, what we're able to do, and it is easier in some respects because we do brand ourselves as a partnership and people are co-owners. We've got a captive audience in terms of that engagement piece, and we put the responsibility on them. So what can you do for us as much as what we can do for you? So I suppose that's what will be truly tested now in the market and the conditions we're facing. You know, John Lewis as a business, for the first time this year, very nearly didn't make a profit in the first half, which is absolutely unheard of for us. So we're into new territory, and we're having to make tough decisions about our business, which all plays into that I suppose that ultimate purpose in the very beginning, and whether you buy into that, I suppose.
All right, should we move on? So, next subject. Let's just talk about tech advances changing businesses, the changing nature of the workforce changing businesses. By the way, if we figure this one out, then I'll race you to the door to set up a business. Just doing it, because I think it's the million-dollar question, which is, so what are the key mindsets and capabilities? There's an awful lot of money being spent on an awful lot of capability development, and as far as I can see, not very much of it's actually delivering the progress businesses need so far, right? I mean, it's hard, really hard yards. So what are the mindsets and capabilities people need to develop if they're going to play an active role and if they're really going to be ready for continuous change? Where do we need to focus our effort? I'm going to ask you two first, because it's quite a tricky question, and you're on stage, so I think you have to go first. I love it.
I'm happy to go.
After you.
So, look, I think one of the biggest drivers, or let's say in our business, the two biggest drivers of change is really technology and regulators. And I used to think of them as two separate kind of strands. More and more, I'm coming to think of them as one strand, because what is fascinating is how the regulators have decided that they can actually use technology to drive their end results as well. So from two strands of change, it's come down to one strand of change, which is all about how does technology change basically virtually everything that we do. And organizations, and a lot of organizations which you all represent in this room, obviously our organization spends an enormous amount of money on technology. In fact, I think financial services, I read somewhere, spends more on technology than all the technology companies in Silicon Valley. It is that scary, right? Now, obviously, our spend is far less efficient than theirs, and definitely far less rewarding. But it's true, right? And I think getting this whole technology change and trying to equate it down to what does it mean for every single person in the organization, moving the mindset of that person, I think is the most critical thing, right? Because if you're not able to move the mindset of that person, then that person is going to fight it. And I don't know whether this is typical of the UK or whatever, the extent of passive resistance, this is what you were saying, where people go back and just do nothing, right? They say, okay, this too shall pass, right? Yeah. This guy is talking a lot, okay, give him a little bit of time, he'll kind of move away. And, just kind of go back and do nothing. That happens a lot. And therefore engaging and saying, why is it relevant for you as a person? Forget about everything else. Forget about the business. Forget about technology. Forget about everything else. Why is it relevant for you as a person? So many times I have a conversation and say, okay, do you know what your son or daughter is doing on his or her phone, the whole day? I was, why? I said, do you realize that social media has no delete button? So your kid, right, has suddenly decided, I don't know how old, 17, 18, whatever drinking age is, had a couple of too many beers one Friday night and put a photograph on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. The minute that photograph goes up, remember, there is absolutely no delete button. There is no way. There's absolutely no way that thing can be deleted, right? Now look at the consequences of that and kind of build it up. So shouldn't you, forget about the business, forget about anything else, shouldn't you, and if it's a young person, that person may have nieces, nephews, brothers and sisters. If it's a slightly elder person, usually has kids, partners. shouldn't you think about this? So isn't it not in your interest to learn about this, right? If it is in your interest to learn about it, then normally people get hooked, right? And you say, can you imagine now how this is changing the lives of every single person, customer that are going? So linking this thing to a very personal level, bringing it in, saying how this is the shift in the mindset, you have no choice, right? This thing about, that you have a choice frankly, is not true, right? The other thing is people say, oh, change is hard. And I say, that's bullshit. Why is change hard? Who told you change is hard? Who's given you a manual? Did any of you come into this world with a manual which actually told you what to do as a kid, what to do as a teenager, what to do when you got married, what to do when you have your own kids, right? What to do when you get old? Nobody has a manual, right? We all learn, we all change. Every time we change. And we change naturally, we expect that change to happen. So if you expect that change to happen, why the hell do you expect certainty and no change in your business, in your workplace and stuff like that? You're changing, you're perfectly equipped to deal with change, right? So I think if you bring it down to that personal level, right, move the mindset there. It's a lot of hard work. Getting the right mindset is not an easy thing to do. You've got to get yourself first into the right mindset. Hopefully you are in the right mindset before you're starting to talk about these things. But I think having these kind of conversations, right, which are very personal, I think make the difference.
So really, a lot of what you just said, really resonates and is quite inspiring. But I think the last point you made, for me, feels really important, which is, again, is something we see in our work a lot, which is senior leaders talking about how everybody else needs to change.
Exactly.
Rather than going, well, actually, is my mind right? Am I ready? Am I open and ready to learn the stuff I need to learn? And by the way, that's not trivial. I think that's hard. You're a CEO. You've got to the top of a business. It's been hard fought. You're older. You're like, surely now I can, stop learning and just kind of enjoy the fruits of my labours. And unfortunately, in this era, definitely not. So I think that last point particularly feels really important. Chris?
Yeah, I think that aspect of encouraging people to re-engage with learning, it's really quite interesting. As I look at our organisation and the people that we work with and support, the question that we're often sort of addressing most with our clients is, how are we helping your workforce to learn again? Because some of those workforces have become very set in their ways. Whether that's a manufacturing business or a sort of a consumer services business or a banking business, you've been defined by a set of processes for a great deal of time. And actually if automation or some other form of innovation is happening that changes that, you've got to begin to engage people again in, well, you can't sit there and say, well, that's it, job done, I don't have a job. You've got to think, what is it that I can bring back to the new role? What are the new skills I have to learn? What are the new experiences I have to learn? And that is not an easy thing to do. But I think it is probably one of the single biggest challenges that is facing the HR and L&D community in its broadest sense, but leadership and organisations in the widest sense, which is, how do you create learning environments, really? How do you encourage people to genuinely want to learn and learn again and learn again and learn again? Because some of the technology change is happening so quickly that we are probably going to see people with some level of coding skills that will be obsolete within 3 years. They've got to be learning what's going to come again and again. And that is not going to be an easy thing for us all to respond to. And I think to your point about CEOs, I use this example internally. I went over to a conference in the States early this year, and it's the first time for 3 days I just went to a conference to sit and listen and immerse myself in what my peers were saying. Best learning experience I've ever had. Better than any paid-for program, better than the Harvard Business School folders that sit on the shelf at home. The opportunity of listening, immersing, and talking with my peers and bringing that back into the business was enormously powerful. And it's made me think much harder about how do we redefine learning in this organisation that I lead. And frankly, we're not clear about that. what is learning in our organisation? How do we support it? How do we develop it? How do we encourage it? How do we recognise it? And ultimately, what does that mean for our people? And that is critical, I think, over the next, well, it is the future agenda.
So let's get practical on this subject. So I think it's fascinating. This kind of subject, which is how do we get, maybe at its core, this conversation about mindset and capability is about how do we get our people hungry to learn? I mean, not just sort of wanting to, not sort of, yeah, I'm up for spending some time, but hungry, really hungry, to learn and relearn and relearn, to your point. I'd be really curious, as, you know, look, we've got, I'm not actually going to try and calculate, but some years of experience sat around this room, and people are right in the thick of it right now. So what is it? And actually, I'm going to look particularly at this side of the room, because you've done quite well with me facing that way a lot. So talk to us a bit about your experiences of how do you go about creating that hunger to learn? You know, if it's not, and let's be honest, it's often not there in large portions of the population in a big business. So how do we make that happen? Because that feels like it's step one, or key ingredient to this conversation. Thank you. Come on, let's have a throw. Yeah. Oh, to me, thanks. There we go. Well done.
Yeah. I'm learning on the job here. Brian Murphy, work for Citi at the bank, and I head up learning and development for Citi. I think obviously I'm very connected with this topic, and we've been looking at this within the bank for quite a while. And there's some things we got right and some things we haven't got right. But I think really taking a holistic look at this topic is really important. So rather than taking a traditional look and saying, well, learning happens through training courses, and this is something that we pay for and people go and do, and it's a convenient solution, it's much more core to the business. So as you three gentlemen were saying, reimagining learning. So to be connecting that for people in their mind, personalizing that first of all, connecting it to purpose, and really articulating what that means and inviting people in to go on a journey with the company. It's really hard work, takes a lot of effort. Really, you need HR and learning people who are up for reimagining their roles, which can be really the hardest bit, actually. The business are usually willing to go on the journey if sometimes the most resistance come with ourselves. And really thinking about, well, looking at employee engagement through the lens of marketing, through not being afraid of really rethinking and reimagining what HR work should be. The last thing I'd say on this, though, is the question that you asked at the very beginning of today, which was, what was the biggest cock-up or biggest mistake? I think we need to rethink failure in our organizations as learning and as the fuel to drive innovation and change. And leaders have a big role to play in that. And so it sounds like you guys are leading the way, but there's a big leadership deficit around this. And that's, I think, where HR people can help as well.
Let's hear from some more people. Go on. So let's have it just about all good. Let's talk more about how do we create that hunger? How do we get that going?
So I think leadership, role modelling, and certainly kind of investing in the space people need to learn, because we all probably want to learn, but actually having the space, time, headspace to do that particularly is really important. But actually I was going to say, copy a point that you said, actually, Brian, about people are scared. I think people are scared, and people don't want to fail. I don't want to learn something that I'm not going to be very good at. And if things are going to change, and I can't change as quickly, then I'll fall behind. So I think making sure there's an environment in all of our organisations where people feel really comfortable learning something new. You might not get it right first time. You've got the space to think and do it, and there's more chance people will be excited about it. Lisa Forrest, Alexander Band Solutions. Wrong way round, sorry.
Thank you. This lady in the front just here.
I thought you were going to throw it.
That's
Ready.
Hi there, Barbara Thompson, Peer Consulting. Bit of provocation. So without getting deeply psychological, we can't make people learn. And I think we're probably at a time now where there needs to be narrative change, because technology has existed for many, many years. It's just become much more pervasive now. So people were using fax, telex, and a variety of things before. So I think I was struck by my time. I used to work at Nationwide, and a very great leader turned around and said that people don't come in to buy mortgage products, they come in to buy homes. So I think it's the way that we position things that people can get behind the learning that I think needs to change, and not that you need to learn this, you need to learn this. So it's about context. The other thing that I would say was, it was a little bit linked to the previous question. But in terms of capabilities, I have a really simplistic view of this, which is that it should all be orientated around the customer. So there's no point inventing digital to support an internal thing and it impacts the customer. And as an example of that, I flew with EasyJet recently, and they've got all self-service tills. And some of the people who struggled were older, not exclusively. So it suited EasyJet from the commercial perspective, but it impacted the customer. So we need to be really, really careful about how we think about our front yard and our backyard when we think about digital.
Thank you. Who else? There was a hand right at the back. There we go. Come on, let's go for it.
Go on,
Let's
go
go for it. Let's go for it. This is going to be a highlight. Oh, brilliant.
Look at that. Bloody hell.
Nice job.
Hi, Ben Chambers. I head up the business school over at Grant Thornton. But in my time at GSK, I did a lot of work around the learning space, and I did a lot of benchmarking. And as one of the conversations I had stuck with me, which is everyone sort of sees Google as having a learning culture and a very learning progressive organisation. So I had a chat with the guys over there about what they do. And I said, the question I asked was basically, how do you create your learning culture, and how do you create a culture, a hunger for learning, which is the same as yours. And she said, she was quite specific about this and said, look, we don't have a learning culture. We don't try and push for a learning culture. We push for a performance culture. And if you want to perform, you need to be good at what you do, and that drives a learning culture. And that's kind of stuck with me. I make sure that whenever I'm working with a business, I don't try and push an HR agenda, which is learning, because they're not really interested. If I try and drive performance, people are much more likely to kind of follow you on that journey.
Very good. Thank you, Sharon. I'm just going to check, Jim, where are we at on time? Because I kind of feel like we could keep going for another hour.
Quarter of an hour?
Quarter of an hour? Okay.
Can I just pick on that point, though? Because I think it's interesting. So I was looking at some research today that have been surveying data, specifically how HR directors and L&D directors had responded to the use of data. None of which suggested that it's being used to deliver business performance improvement. A lot of it was to justify what you were doing. And that, to me, is a really interesting issue. And I'm not trying to sort of move away from learning piece, but it is this whole sense of, so where does learning sit? And if you're right, and I believe that, and I agree with you, that actually whatever we do about creating learning cultures has got to be to drive an outcome of some sort, hasn't it? But actually, it's the challenge back for the wider community of how much of your time are you thinking about if this intervention in learning, training, or competency development or behaviour change, what's the impact on the business? To your point, does that improve customer experience? Is it improving customer retention? That's the big ask here, I think, because then you can create cause and effect, and I think then you create an environment where people can say, well, what have I got to do to have more impact in the business? I don't know where you guys are on that curve. How much time do you spend looking at your interventions and the impact on business? True impact, return. There's a business opportunity.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think...
I'll take that.
Sorry,
Do
do
you want
it.
Do I need a microphone?
Yeah, go on. For everybody else, there we go.
So Simon Gibson from Fujitsu. I'm the Director of L&D for Europe. So everything I do is about business outcome, right? So I've only been 12 months in the organisation. I changed everything we did because too many of the things were nice to. There's a big conspiracy, on Ben's point, around learning. We do learning because we've always done learning, and it's a nice thing to do. It makes people feel comfortable and safe because they might want to learn something. Well, that's not going to shape and transform your business, I'm afraid. Our priorities are very clear. You asked a question earlier about skills, capability. It's pretty similar across many industries. It's agile, it's cloud, it's fast IT, IoT, big data, cybersecurity. If your organisation is not learning about those things and how it impacts the customer, then you're behind everybody else. And it's a fair challenge to our profession, but maybe not many of our profession are doing that to sharpen it up, to be very pointed on if we do X, it means Y. So that's just my view.
Yeah. I really love this insight of learning culture is the wrong question. Performance culture is the question, and then we go from there. I had thought for a second, actually, I don't know what happened in my brain, but I kind of thought, I can't wonder whether we're going to go almost the other direction and go, well, actually, part of this issue is it's kind of too late once the people are in. Maybe. Do you mean like, because actually, I remember I think it was the HR director Group HR director at Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton, which is a terrible thing to confuse, but anyway, it's one of those two chains. And they used to talk about you can't teach people things that their mum ought to have taught them, right? There's just so in their case they were talking about service cues and kind of going. They interviewed people in the restaurant because they wanted to see whether people held the door open, were they polite to the waiter. So you can't possibly come into a service-oriented culture if you can't do that. But I find myself wondering whether there's a bit of a truth to kind of actually. We could spend a lot of time trying to help people connect to their hunger for learning, or maybe we just recruit people who are hungry to learn and kind of go, well, if you're not hungry to learn, you're going to really struggle to be part of where this business, particularly as a big scale business that is in the journey of change and is arguably behind or less efficient, in Ashok's words, than some of the tech players in your market. Well, it's a luxury, having anybody in our business that doesn't want to do that. We can't afford that luxury.
Yeah, so here's my view on the world, right? And there's a paradigm in all our systems that outside of work, you have superhuman capability to answer any question in the world because of these wonderful products that we have access to and a wonderful thing called Google that you can find out anything. And you come into work and something in the water or in the air sucks the life out of you for your capability or your ability to do that. Now, isn't that weird, right? Because how many people go to your intranet to answer a question? Probably very few. If you look at the data, and I look at our data, what's the regular search terms? How do I ... They don't go to our intranet to answer lots of those questions, right? So there's a weird thing in the system, isn't there? That we're shaped by these devices. I love the Apple example. I use it a lot. Didn't come with instructions, right? It's powered on. It's ready to use. If you've got to explain to somebody in your organisation how to do something, it's probably too complex already. And we're shaped by things happening outside the world at a speed that works 4, 5, 10 times faster than even any of these organisations can work, right? So you're always chasing something that's already evolved, that's already better, that's already faster. And it's just, that's the paradigm for me.
So is that killing curiosity?
Well, I mean, I wonder whether it brings us back full circle to this thing about if I've got no personal connection to the objectives of the organisation or the purpose of the organisation, then why would I? Because outside work, I know that the why is answered. I'm doing that because it suits my why. In an organisation, suddenly I've got to connect to this thing's why or the collective why, and if I haven't got that, then I probably go, I think one of the best conversations I've had in our business over the last 2 years was with somebody who we loved dearly, who had a critical skill set, who chose to leave. And when we talked about why he chose to leave, he said, because the clearer the purpose of this organisation becomes, we're only 4 years old, the clearer I become that I don't connect to it. It's not my thing. And I was like, shit, I have no answer to that. It makes me profoundly sad that you're going to leave. But what actually it makes me kind of profoundly happy that we've got something articulated clearly and well enough that it's allowed you to make that decision. That must mean something's right. So but maybe it's about that. Okay, I'm conscious of time. So last 7 minutes, and I've got 2 minutes. I've got a final question that I need to ask these two gents, put them under a bit of pressure at the end of the night. So we've got about 5 minutes. What's the key responsibility of leaders in this world of mobilising the business for continuous change? I think leaders are under the most enormous cognitive overload themselves. Right, it's a very challenging time to lead. So what's the I'm going to try and make us reduce it down to one, but what's the key responsibility of leaders in this effort to mobilise people for continuous change?
So if I was to answer that question, I think the key responsibility is getting the right team, right? Clearly putting yourself on a pedestal and saying you're going to try and get it done is the wrong answer. You're going to get it wrong. So therefore, how do you kind of think about what do you need and how do you build a team that complements each other, works? Everybody will tell you, my team is fantastic. They all kind of work really well together. Again, it's just not true, right? And if you believe that, it's just not true. Really getting the right people onto the team and making that team truly function as a team, I think is I think is the only way you can make this happen.
Chris?
Sustainability, leaving the organisation in a better place than when you joined it.
Others, come on, we must all have a view on this question. So, what's the key responsibility of leaders in this effort to mobilise people around continuous change?
This guy's in front of me is going to. Thanks,
He's
Dan.
good at ducking and weaving, though.
I think for me, it's assumed they just need to listen more. I know that sounds very trite, but it's incredible how little real listening happens by many leaders. And if they're really paying attention to what's going around them, be it their customers, their people, then and they're really genuine about that, then good things will happen. So listening is a very underrated skill in my mind.
Okay, let's keep going. I'm keen to hear from some people who haven't spoken so far. I know you've all got a view on this. So, somebody else. What else? What are the other things that are over this side? Are you gonna? You're gonna halfway me. Okay. All right. Here we go.
It's good noise.
Good satisfying thud, isn't it?
I think for me, it's synthesizing information. I think I absolutely agree with the point there around listening and taking in that information. But there's so much going on. There is so much information, and it's synthesizing into something that's then meaningful for your people.
Can you tell us who you are? Sorry.
Yes, sorry. Sam Hannis from Jacobs.
Thanks, Sam. Anybody else? Come on. A couple more. Go on.
It ties very much into listening, and it's, I guess, a lesson I've learned. It's humility. It's often there's so much going on. You're trying to solve things. You're trying to work it out for yourself. And I guess if you've got a kind of an extrovert personality, a lot of that thinking happens in the open, which is a distinct disadvantage. And so stopping listening, but I think it's having a humility that, I guess, to your point, Ashok, having people around you, they've got the answers. And that often it solves so many things. People feel involved, people contribute to things, you get, different answers, different perspectives. But it's hard. I think I keep tripping up myself, I have to say.
Has anybody got, go on. One more at the back, very good. Good luck, Jim.
I think it's about being the change you want to see. So I think it's much easier to take someone or people on the journey with you if you're there and you're actively modelling it from the front and actually making that change yourself.
Thank you. Has anybody got, I'm conscious that we've kind of had this conversation in the round, so I don't know if anybody's got any questions. I'm kind of conscious that we haven't done any traditional Q&A. Has anybody got a question that they just want to ask Ashok or Chris? Thank you.
Oh, I can't catch.
There you go. Thea's going to catch for you. Brilliant.
Caroline Roberts from Visit Britain. If you were working as an HR practitioner, how do you deal with leadership who aren't really interested with all of this? And they kind of believe their own publicity, and they, obviously haven't worked with you guys. And they think they can just carry on the way they are, employ their mates, do more of the same, and just keep out of the trouble, and everything will be fine.
Oh, good question.
What's your point?
I mean, just because it's a thing that's often the first stage of what we have to do. I think there is a truth which we all kind of know in psychology, which is fear is pretty motivating, and sometimes you have to shock leaders. I think out of that complacency, you just have to. You can't let that be the only thing you do because fear is also corrosive, right? So you've kind of then got to work with them on what the path forward is, etc. But actually, I've kind of, whether it's a reflection of internally what's really going on, and by the way, I think one of our key philosophies is that's got to be an emotional connection. Yeah. Rationally getting them to connect is not enough. It's not going to work. They're all human beings, despite sometimes appearances. They have kids. They are very, even in the most left brain kind of analytical business, they are emotional human beings. They're emotional creatures. If you can find a way to get them to emotionally connect with both the change out there and the pace at which it's coming, and or the change in current reality in here, and what their combined impact as a leadership team. If you can get them to do that, which by the way, I think you can do in like 2 or 3 hours, it's quite amazing how quickly you open people up to, okay, now there's a conversation to have. But until that point, particularly if you engage with them rationally, they will not open up to that conversation. They'll just stay, in the relative safety of the cocoon they've built themselves, which is what they're doing. By and large, it's a fear response, isn't it?
But if you sincerely, I think, if you sincerely believe that they're kind of wedded to this path and they're not going to go down this path, then life is too short. Why are you there?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, move on. Right?
Change job or change the CEO.
Correct. None of the two.
What a good note to nearly end on. Okay, so said the 3 CEOs. Holy shit, who's going to remove me now? So, final question. I just thought, there's a little thing going on in the outside world that's quite relatively distracting called Brexit. And the lovely thing about this week is there's a whole 72 hours left. Anything could happen. So, what's your view and your prediction on what's going to happen with Brexit? Go on. Yes, there's no easy gigs on stage. Go on. Oh, I'm just exactly. Nobody tweet anything. Go on. So to of you, what's your view? What's your prediction?
Well, I think we talked about this earlier, didn't we? And we probably agreed the position of just this is going to be kicked down the road. No firm decisions are going to be made. This will play out for much longer than we perceive.
Ashok, anything to?
No, I think politicians are really good at kicking the can down the road,
Yeah.
and that's what I think they're going to do again. I don't think anybody's going to have the guts to stand up and say, I'm going to try and renegotiate the deal which they've been kind of renegotiating for a long time. And look, you may want to renegotiate. The other party has to engage as well. So I'm not sure anybody is ready to kind of do that. And then I'm not sure anybody's going to take the guts and say, I want a second referendum, right? Because, look, at the end of the day, 50.1% of the people did say that they wanted Brexit. So, the easiest solution is kick the can down the road, right? So kick it down 2 years, and we'll see what happens over that period of time, right? Now, but to your point, anything could happen, right?
Very good. Look, I think it's, thank you so much, everybody, for piling in the spirit you did and for the directness of your questions and your views, etc. Huge thanks to Ashok and Chris for making themselves available, subjecting themselves to the random questioning that was due to come at them. And I think, I'm sure Jim will want to say something to close, but I'm sure we're also all ready for a drink. So thanks very much.